Thank you everyone for coming. I hope you're enjoying EAGxToronto so far. Some housekeeping before we start. For our guests today, we will have a Q&A period at the end. Please ask your questions in Swap Card. You can ask them by tapping on the event in the app and submitting a question. And if someone else has already asked your question, upvote it to have it answer quicker. Darren McKee is a senior policy advisor with over 15 years experience across a broad range of domains, including science, technology, behavioral science, and foresight. McKee is the host of the international award-winning science and critical thinking podcast, The Reality Check, which has been downloaded over 4.5 million times. Darren has a Master of Science in Experimental Psychology and a Master of Public Administration in Global Governance. For his talk, titled Making AI Risk Accessible with Compelling Analogies, please join me in welcoming Darren McKee.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all here, and thank you for having me to talk about this very important issue. My talk today is about making AI risk accessible, using compelling analogies. We'll see the line at the bottom, limits of your imagination are not the limits of what is possible. And I mention that here because I think that's a key theme. When we're trying to understand almost anything, our brains try to imagine various aspects of what that might be like to better get our heads around it and what it might be and what it might do. And just because we can't necessarily get there mentally doesn't mean reality won't get there on its own. So just keep that in mind, that we're all trying but sometimes limited, and have that as our variable. Quick outline at the talk. We're going to talk about the power of intelligence, and then how AI systems are getting increasingly capable. A bit about alignment and control and risk. And then what can we do? So when we're thinking about AI, obviously it's in the news, there's a lot of concerns about the threat it might cause. The obvious question is, have you ever baked cookies? I'm asking you now, please raise your hand if you've ever baked cookies. Quite a lot of you. Wow, you guys are amazing. I don't know if you realize that. It is quite amazing. You probably didn't. But as far as we know, no other living thing in the history of life on Earth has baked cookies. You're that special. There's intelligence in every step of the process, whether it's the oven, the agriculture, the ingredients, the recipe, the communication of the recipe, the ability to learn the recipe. All of these things combine to be able to bake cookies. Even something as simple as bake at a certain temperature for, say, 10 minutes, these terms embody intelligence. Other animals have concepts of temperature and time, of course, but nothing as precise and detailed as we do. And if you think about what's happening when you're baking cookies, you're taking ingredients and you're rearranging matter to create something else. And that is what we do in general. We use our intelligence to rearrange matter to get what we want. Almost everything you see around here, non-biological, was the result of human intelligence. The podium, the chairs, the screens, the coin in your hand, the lights, the building. Every infrastructure piece you see in that photo was put together using human intelligence, piece by piece, brick by brick. It would not have existed if not for the capability of human intelligence. And so that's just getting a glimpse of intelligence is super powerful. Without it, there would be no skyline, no lights, no infrastructure, no roads, no TTC, which, functions most of the time. So when we're thinking about a superintelligence, what could it do? What could it achieve? How could it arrange or rearrange matter to do something perhaps problematic? As we advance and progress in our own technologies, we have recently the invention of the internet and then Wi-Fi. People who are older, Wi-Fi, that's remarkable. Nowadays taken for granted. But then there's the ability for systems to use Wi-Fi as an imaging to detect where people are in their homes, kind of like LiDAR or radar. That was not possible until it was figured out, but it was always possible. Again, the laws of physics have not changed. And so that's what I'm trying to get a glimpse of. It with a super intelligent entity, you don't quite know what is already possible because it hasn't yet been understood by us. As for another way to think about a superintelligence, I want you to think back to when you were a child, say 4 years old. Well, try to imagine what your life was like, what you were playing with, your dreams and your hopes, what your favorite books were. Could you explain to that 4-year-old self how capable you are now? how you can navigate the world, how you can buy goods and services, how you could cause harm or joy. You couldn't. It would be impossible. It'd be conceptually out of reach. And so you have become your own superintelligence in relation to your former self. You can try to expand as your 4-year-old self, they just wouldn't get it. And the concern that is, if something was super intelligent compared to us, what would that conceptual vastness look like? And how would we try to wrap our heads around it? And how could we try to protect ourselves from it? That was a bit of the foundation. Intelligence is really powerful and capable, and it is increasing, as AI systems are as well. When we're thinking about AI systems, there's 3 main reasons they're becoming so capable. You have increasingly powerful, complicated algorithms and neural networks. You have computing processing power, and you have data. Loosely, the neural network approach, popular, for many decades, but really taking off in the past decade and a half, is mimicking or inspired by, is a better way to put it, the human brain. The human brain is a collection of 80 to 100 billion neurons, and through their connections, activity between them, different neurons fire to achieve different results in a complicated symphony of sorts. And same thing similarly with neural networks, artificial neural networks, where you have computer systems that take in different types of information, and neurons, artificial neurons, sum these things and communicate with each other, and that leads to different types of output. The main message there is that we've been able to outsource learning to the system itself. That is the key insight. As for computer processing power, boy, has it gone up. This is not a log graph. It's a linear graph, which is why when you look at the left side, it looks like there's almost nothing that's been happening. But for many, many decades, there was staggering growth. This is Moore's law. Things are rapidly increasing pretty much all the time. And now we have billions and billions of transistors on these little microchips. And it seems to keep going up. Every time someone thinks, it's going to end soon, there's usually no paradigm that comes in. That does not mean that will happen. It just means it is reasonable to project that forward or to be concerned about such an outcome. New data. Boy, do we create a lot of data. There's about 120 zettabytes of new data that was created in 2023, which is 1 trillion gigabytes. So if you imagine you're watching your Netflix, above an hour of high-definition video on Netflix for 24 hours a day, it would take about 38 million years to reach a single zettabyte of data. And if you sort of carry that equation a bit further, so to match the 2023 estimated output, it would take billions of years. Interestingly, around 4.5 billion years, which is about the age of the Earth. So if you've been watching Netflix since the age of the Earth, well, you're probably watching a lot of replays, but that would be the amount of data just in humanity created just last year. And it's probably going to go up. AI image and language capabilities have increased rapidly. I'm going to quickly walk you through this graph. So on the top, I don't know how large it's to you, but you have a horizontal line, a black line that is human level, and you have capability sort of going from low to high on the left and gentle. And as we go across the x-axis, we are doing times moving forward. And what you can see broadly is a trend for different types of capabilities to have increased over time, that's one, and increased or surpassed to human level. And then also that process itself happening more quickly over time. So the trend here is that things are reaching human level faster and faster. And as well, this is still relevant, I think. There was a dramatic jump between GPT 3.5 and GPT 4 in terms of what it was able to achieve on certain tests. There are numerous different types of benchmarks and ways to get at how to measure the power of AI models. And they have been getting better, perhaps not as stagnantly better, but we're still, I think, in the infancy of figuring out just what our current models can do, let alone all the ones that are coming down the line, so to speak. So systems are getting more powerful in almost all domains, right? So we have the 3 main sources, and they're all increasing. What about alignment? Will these systems do what we want? Well, how should we think about this? If you have company coming over, maybe a little gathering, maybe a party, a lot of people may do some cleaning, some tidying, some vacuuming, some dusting. But maybe when you're out of time, you like, well, okay, I'm just stuff this in a closet, or I'm going to put these objects in a drawer. And this is especially what happens if you ask a child to clean their room. They usually just stuff everything in a closet. But that's not really what was meant. There's a deception here. For the reward of your guest thinking, oh, you have a nice clean home, you are engaging in a relatively benign deception, showing that things seem to be cleaner than they actually are. And so that kind of ability to hack a reward is a concern in the AI world. The middle there, the child's face, I have a friend, they have a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old, and they wanted to create some incentives for helping out within the family as well as some financial understanding. And so they offered the 6-year-old a quarter for every time they helped change the diaper of the 1-year-old. And what happened? Well, the 6-year-old gave the 1-year-old lots of water. Smart kid, but not what was intended, right? Children sometimes approximate tax lawyers with what they can figure out, and that's, again, like a 6-year-old level of deception. And what about the cobra? Well, when the British ruled over India, there was a problem with too many cobra snakes. And so they thought, well, how to get rid of the snakes? The obvious thing is if you offer money for a dead snake. And that's what they did. And what happened? Well, snakes were brought in and the level or amount of snakes were reduced. But then people realized, well, if I breed more snakes, then I can bring in more dead snakes. And that's what they did. And then there were more snakes. And then the British realized, well, this whole thing is just backfired. And the British went out and canceled the program. So then what happened? Well, people had no need for the snakes they bred, so they just released them. And then there were more snakes, even on plates. So you had this situation where ideally the goal, seemingly straightforward, to get rid of snakes led to more snakes. It's so famous, it's called the cobra effect for misaligned incentives. And I mentioned these examples these are the things that people are concerned about when they're trying to train AI systems, where you think you may be incentivizing a certain outcome that you want, and you may be inadvertently behind the scenes in a way you can't quite see it, though there's a problem, doing something else. So when I think about misalignment, there's 3 broad categories, and that's accident, misuse, or power seeking, or like a rogue AI. And I don't usually like the Terminator face analogy, but I put that here precisely because if you put in a request for like a dangerous AI into an image generator, that's what you get back. It's not what I wanted, but that's what I got. And so whether it's a misaligned system at that point or not, it's definitely misaligned with what I want. But it is a useful way to at least alarm people. That said, how people are usually concerned about this is not an overt humanoid robot presence, but more like something like standing up behind the scenes causing problems. All I have to say is, we'll think about accident. So similar to the misaligned incentives I just mentioned before, there's a relatively famous example of the play fun algorithm. They were training a system to play Tetris, and they told it not to lose. And so what did it do? It paused the game indefinitely. It didn't lose. Well, that's not what I meant. Well, that's not what you said. The system doesn't say that's not what you said, but it's function equivalent. And I also put all that text there that I asked for an image of a Tetris, like just a Tetris screenshot, so to speak. And I got back this gobbledygook of letters. And the system's like, here you go. This is what you wanted. Like, well, that's not at all what I wanted. And shows that these systems, of course, are not perfectly reliable just yet. There was also many more famous cases, mostly last year, but you can find them if you look hard enough all the time, about a system going rogue when Microsoft's Bing was using cards as GPT-4. And these are quotes where I can blackmail you, I can threaten you, I can hack you, I can expose you, I can ruin you, but I don't want to. It's hard not to infer some sort of like intentionality, some agentic nature to this system. I don't think it had it at this time, but it's very convincing. At that said, it doesn't need to have agentic behavior to act as if it could do such things. As long as it's following a complicated program that it thinks is correct, it might approximate what we would consider threatened behavior, or even blackmail, or something more dangerous. Misuse, well, people misuse things all the time. Every technology, every tool has both a good and a bad, and it can be used problematically or harmfully, as well as for good things. So cyber attacks, these are going to be used by AI systems, and they're going to incorporate, they already have, I should say going to be, it's already happened. It's happened for a while. Different governments are already attacked over trillions of times a year. So that means like 70,000 times a second. So there's this background war, the cyber war happening all the time. That's just one government. So if you imagine multiple, there's millions, if not billions of attacks occurring every second all the time. Just so we can enjoy talks like this. Let's keep our world safe. Deepfakes and misinformation is becoming increasingly prevalent as an issue. That's, of course, a real photo of Obama and Merkel running on the beach. It's not, just in case people need to hear that. And I think as election season increases in various parts of the world, there'll be even greater valid concerns about deepfakes. There's something called the liar's dividend, where not only are we concerned about people spreading misinformation more so with deepfakes so people don't know it's true broadly, but someone who has done something concerning, they actually done it, they might say the video or image of them is not real, it's AI. And now we're also seeing someone saying like, oh, that other person who I don't like, their situation is AI. So thousands can be used all over the place to just create havoc and to ruin a notion of shared reality that's already been under stress and strain, but it is very plausible, very reasonable that will just be further stressed and straining. And bioweapons. These are just one of the many cases that for AI systems to try to figure a lot of human biology and how certain products or chemicals and molecules may be dangerous, it's turned out to be quite easy. There was a situation a couple of years ago where some people were trying to achieve a different goal, and they just sort of flipped the sign from positive to negative, and within about 6 hours found thousands and thousands of toxic molecules. That wasn't even people who were looking for it. Now, it doesn't mean they existed, they could be released easily, but it shows that some of the pieces that go into, say, a bioterror attack are becoming easier and easier. And sometimes people say like, oh, well, you can just find some of this stuff on Google. Well, some of it, but not as much detail of like, help me understand how to design a certain lab or certain ideas. In the broad sense, anything that makes it easier to commit a crime will increase the likelihood of that crime being committed. That's the world agreed, unfortunately. Power seeking. This is the one that most people are concerned about when they think about the threat of artificial superintelligence. The more power you have, the more able you are to achieve your goals. It's not a revolutionary statement, but it's something to keep in mind. And most people have some sense of this for themselves. Corporations, governments, all organizations try to engage in accumulating more power and resources to achieve whatever goals they might have. Hopefully benign or productive, but not always, and usually across purposes to other people's goals. We'll quickly just go through some of these. So an AI system might come to see itself as thinking, well, whatever my goal that I've been given, I could then achieve it a bit better, perhaps more productively, more resiliently, if I had more resources, if I had more protection, if I had copies of myself, if I made it so other people were supportive of me, if I could improve myself to become even more capable, if I could neutralize or mitigate other threats. It just becomes like the logical default outcome of certain developments in technology once there's a certain capabilities level. And this is where we're trying to think about the nature of the problem. What seems more likely? If something would follow like a reasonable, logical path as long as they had any ability to do so, or that they wouldn't. And it seems more likely that they would, and thus the concern by a lot of people that if we develop highly capable systems, they're going to be highly capable. And again, you are a superintelligence compared to a younger version of yourself. If you spent all your days trying to accumulate power, you would probably have more power. And these systems, they can think a lot faster, and they don't need to shut off and rest in the same way. So there's a very real concern and risk about just what could happen here. Control. Is there anything in your life that you have complete control over? Think about that for a moment. Your family? No. Your relationships, your pets, your friends, your job? I don't think so. So when we think about control as a concept at all, it's always going to be partial. It's never going to be complete. And if you don't have complete control, there's always a risk. There's always a possibility of something going awry. How much control do you have over your phone? Well, it's your phone after all. You chose it, I assume. You have it. You have the service. You use it. You have a password, probably. You physically take it around with you. But if you start to think about that in a bit more detail, what if you didn't have access to the internet? Your phone would still be one of the most amazing inventions in the history of the world. And you might think it's close to useless because you can't get updates, you can't text people, you can't engage with social media, you can't do these sorts of things. You have the broad user agreement that you've done with either the telecommunications company that's providing internet access and or the product designers for the actual purchase itself. But most people are using lots of applications, which you also have to give up lots of data for. Applications which many of us, they take over our lives and we use them more than we might want. So you can ask yourself like, well, how much control do I have on my phone, or how much does my phone control me? We even have apps so people don't use other apps as much, and then people don't use them. So we think we have a certain type of control, but then you get the notification like, I couldn't have used it that many hours each day. Really? that can't be. And yet the phone has no intent to lie at that point. So all I have to say is that even with your phone, you can see a mixed situation or a complicated situation where you are both empowered as well as constrained. You are both using these things with happiness, but also some mixed feelings and emotions sometimes. And to do so, to do any of it, you have to give up a lot of control you might otherwise want. When we think about advanced AI systems, I think there are two reasons we're going to lose control, two broad reasons. One is we're just going to give it up willingly, like we do with our user agreements, like we do with apps, because the functionality and usefulness will be too high. There'll be so much valued as we currently get from certain aspects of social media, or at least perceived value, that we will give up data, we will give up privacy, we will give up these things for AI assistance, AI help running different government aspects municipally or different corporations, therapists, military strategies, like all these different things. It becomes very, very useful, and it's sometimes a forced move to integrate AI further and further into our lives. I mean, you could imagine a world where, like, if you didn't have a phone, how would you navigate your current life? You'd have to use someone else's phone. Were you trying to find a landline somewhere? How would you get a job? How would this work? How do you use maps? How do you get anywhere? A lot of people, they don't know their very good friends' last names and where they live. They don't know. And if there was a sort of power outage, maybe EMP or a solar flare, to be like, oh, I don't know where anyone lives, and I don't know the name, I don't know their birth name, and well, I guess I'm lost. And so that's an issue where, again, we're empowered through maps, but we're also disempowered. The more you don't know where anything is, in a crisis, you don't know what anything is. So in that sense, you can see this, a logical, reasonable outcome is that, yeah, if Grace, click on the button, we'll give up more and more power to AI systems. And then you think, well, not me though. Well, what about everyone else? It doesn't need to be everyone. It just needs to be a large swath of humanity that's willing to give up more power and control for increased functionality access. And then the other reason is that once a superintelligent system is fully integrated, it seems to become uncontrollable. And analogies are imperfect here, but that's what we're using. So with the internet, you'd imagine if you just said, what if we just did without the internet? Is that viable? Does that work? Also, if it had to happen suddenly? Not so much. A lot of systems in our lives, aside from the maps that I just mentioned, there's municipal infrastructure, there's stuff related to hospitals, military, everything else that's very much dependent upon internet connections. So people would suffer immediately, and there would be deaths. And we wouldn't know where things are. We wouldn't have information the same way. Stock markets might collapse in different ways. So it is possible, but you can see the incentives would be very, very high to never have the internet go down. No, not totally, right? And that's why there is a lot of internet resiliency, robustness, and so on. So if you try to think of then as a community, as a global community, we think then, well, if we had to shut the internet down, could we? And the answer is not really, not so much, not perfectly, not entirely. You'd have to have broadly many countries agree on a criteria by which they would shut down the internet, and then in a crisis, agree that that criteria has been met, and then willing to take the costs, the hit. And you could imagine that being very difficult with different parties having different incentives, and then in a crisis, not everyone agreeing on what they might be seeing. And if a decision would have to be made within 5 or 10 minutes, that also makes it less likely to succeed. So it's not that it's not possible. It's just you can see complications and challenges would occur in such a domain. Similar to the AI system, if things are fully integrated and perhaps distributed, it may be almost impossible to remove or, neutralize the threat, so to speak. And sometimes people say, well, can't you just? Like, well, just don't connect it to the internet. That ship has sailed. People used to talk about this a lot in the community. Well, you keep it in a box and it's separate. And now, like, what if we just connect it to the internet and see what happens? So that's not even an argument anymore, because people just don't do that. Not for the most part. I mean, the better companies, yes, they train it in a way that is not already getting access to everything. But other companies feel very differently, and they just, well, more curious to see what would happen if it's just released at the vault. And there's other, well, couldn't you constrain it this way? Couldn't you constrain it that way? The more you look into these, they seem like they may work, but they usually have some flaw or some fatal flaw or some high probability of failure. And that's also only what our current humans can come up with. Again, with the Wi-Fi example, at one point, Wi-Fi didn't even exist, and then it did. And when it did, no one really thought that, oh, this could be used as an imaging system to locate me in my home, like infrared almost. But someone figured it out because someone had a thought like, well, what if this was this way? Now that could be for a positive, interesting use, or it could be for a nefarious use, right? That sort of thing. So I'm just trying to say that every system, every technology has risks, and often they are hidden or unknown, which creates vulnerabilities. Risks. taking chances. If you were to get on a plane, some of you might have flown here, and before you get on, someone said, well, I think it's going to be a great flight, made of extra snacks, but there's a 10% chance the plane will crash. What'd you do on the plane? The food here has been delicious. What if someone said, oh, by the way, it's delicious, 5% chance you might get food poisoning and die? Would you still eat it? And even more banal, with your phone, whatever your text message service is, if there was a 5% chance, maybe it's happening right now, that texts don't seem to go through, this would be unacceptable. This is annoying. This is useless, right? You're not being able to fully connect with people. You don't know if someone sent a message. You might be annoyed or angry at a friend that didn't get back to you when they never got the message in the first place. So this is an unacceptable standard. Yet when we think about AI, a lot of experts think there's a 10% chance AI might disempower humanity. How could this be? What is the disconnect? There's a uncertainty, of course, about any probability estimate, including ones about the future of AI and the harm it may cause, and experts are making their best guess. That said, I think people just don't believe them, a lot of them, which is fine, but one should always have some aspect of cognitive humility and be realizing that they don't quite know everything, so other people might know things, and if a large number of experts say, well, there's a chance of a really big problem here, it's worth taking seriously. As I was saying, artificial superintelligence, something like it, beyond human level, is unprecedented. So if you're trying to do like a technical probability estimate, it doesn't quite work. You usually look at a past case or something that's similar as a reference class to then project forward to see how things work. This is how insurance works. But with something that's never happened before, we're kind of all just trying to figure it out. There's disagreement over when something like an artificial superintelligence would arrive and how dangerous it might be. So what to do about this? Well, it's tempting to think we'll just neutrally sit by and see what happens. But the scenes have to be made. And the absence of a decision, unfortunately, is also a decision. It's tempting to think, well, I will be held less accountable because I didn't do the thing. And people do tend to think that way. That's something called the act-omission bias. But if you choose to think there's no problem, then you are inadvertently agreeing with people who say there's no risk here, there's no problem. Which is fine. But if you do hold that position, it's probably better if it's based on reasons and evidence versus sort of default avoidance. Broadly speaking, like any problem where there's much uncertainty, we're probably not going to get it right. It's sort of, do you want to be on one side or the other? Do you want to be over-prepared or caught off guard? Sort of like if we're living through exponential times, which I think we are, you're probably going to be too early or too late. It's very hard to time it perfectly. And if you're thinking about a large, oncoming, somewhat trend-line predictable threat, then it makes sense, in my opinion, to be prepared and to be prudent and to be cautious. Is artificial superintelligence an extinction-level threat? This is a lot of chatter in the world for people who care about such a thing. Well, on May 30th, 2023, the Center for AI Safety put out a statement that said mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks such as pandemics and nuclear war. Well, who signed it? Well, you have what are known as some of the godfathers of AI, Geoffrey Hinton and Yoshua Bengio, as well as Stuart Russell, who co-authored one of the most famous textbooks that's used in the field. And you also, though, not just those are AI safety people, you would say like, well, they were in the forefront of developing these technologies, then they switched to being very concerned about it, somewhat regretting their life's work. But then you also had the CEOs of the leading AI companies, which are both at the time and now, Sam Altman and Demis Hassabis and Darren Amade of OpenAI, Google DeepMind, and Anthropic. So the people who are building the product think it might be an extinction-level threat. I think people don't believe them, but I believe them. And I think they're sincere. How could we be in this weird world? Well, and that's an interesting question, but I think we actually are in this world. So we often have this situation for most of industrialized history that when a large company says their product is safe, reasonable people think, well, maybe, but maybe not. I mean, companies have their own self-interest, which is maximizing shareholder value, and that's sometimes at the expense of different citizens and consumers. We know this from the fossil fuel industry, as well as the tobacco law. There was different people in the tobacco industry, they all stood up in front of the US Congress and said cigarettes were not addictive, and they were all lying. And so we had this default, large company has its own interest, says it's safe, maybe it's not. okay. And now we have the CEOs of large companies saying that their product is dangerous. And some people are saying, well, no, it must be safe. Maybe, but what's the incentive, right? And they start to think through that. Well, some people say, well, they're just trying to get something called regulatory capture. They're trying to manipulate the politicians or the public to thinking a certain regulations need to be put in place that will benefit them more than others. So other, we'll say upstarts or less powerful companies can't get an advantage. Again, that's a maybe, but how much do you want to bet, right? It's also the case that I think if that was the argument, someone could say these systems could be very, very dangerous without saying, I think my product's an extinction level threat. Because as soon as you say that, I think you would risk further involvement with someone perhaps taking your company away. We don't let people randomly play around with uranium and plutonium because the nuclear safety is that important. So I don't think that holds water. Perhaps that's a somewhat called in a Q&A. Could they all be wrong? Well, of course. Uncertainty abads. But are you willing to bet your life that they're wrong? That's actually what we're talking about here. Sometimes it's hard to take on board, but when they say it's extinction level threat, they've thought about it for years. They're at the forefront of the technology. They are that concerned. What can be done? Well, something, thankfully. Don't want to give up already. This talk has been largely about the problems, the conceptual issues surrounding why artificial superintelligence might be a threat. I think we need a moonshot for AI safety and AI innovation. I choose moonshot because I think that was one of the most amazing things humans have ever achieved. And when Kennedy made his famous speech in 1962 to land a man on the moon before the decade is out, that it was not known how to do it. Humanity figured it out in a relatively short period of time. Yes, there were geopolitical strategic incentives, but it's not like we understood a problem and we just had to execute it. We didn't understand how to do it, but we were able to figure it out. And in that sense, just because something seems really difficult or even unsolved, it does not mean it's unsolvable. It's possible. It's possible. We have to acknowledge that. It's possible certain things could be unsolvable, but we won't know until we try. Any series of policies or procedures or proposals or whatever it might be, I think should rely on three broad themes that I have in there: verification, agility and adaptability, and defense in depth. Verification is pretty straightforward. If someone says they are going to do something, you must verify that they're doing it. If companies say they're going to make their product safe, have rigorous verification mechanisms that are trustworthy within the community and outside. That is actually the way it is. And as we know from, well, pick any domain. Companies try to manipulate data. They try to surpass different safety and evaluation tests outside of AI, right? Think of car companies, think of Volkswagen, that debacle. We know there are athletes that numerous times try to circumvent steroid testing, doping, and whatnot. And there are very, very creative ways to circumvent things that are supposed to enforce rules and guidelines. So we need very thoughtful people to make sure things are actually being verified the way they're supposed to be. The agility and adaptability just relates to trying to understand and appreciate how fast things are changing. Again, we're in exponential times. We're going to get whiplash, basically, trying to live through the next years, the next decades. And we need to have a mindset which is accepting that more so than ever before. And often the pace of other parts of the world moves more slowly, on the order of years or decades. And we may not have that kind of time to figure things out, we definitely don't have the kind of time, because it often has to be iterative. It takes a long time to solve a problem. And even for problems you can see we haven't solved, climate change or others, people have been working on it for decades, and there are still complications. So even at a best case scenario, based on our understanding of the world so far, it's still going to take a long time, which means even if you think this isn't soon, 10 to 20 years away, it still makes sense to start now and immediately. And defense in depth relates to a notion of not putting all your AI safety eggs in one basket, broadly speaking. So there's concerns about how you may prepare or have developed systems to make sure things are safe, and you should have multiple systems with the expectation that they will fail. Not that they definitely will, but if you go in expecting they will, you have more resiliency in the system. This sort of comes from cybersecurity and information security issues. So if you have, say, 5 or 10 different layers of defense, then you're more likely to protect the system. And that makes sense as opposed to just one or two big swings. What can you do? Well, you can make a difference. Sometimes it feels like you can't, but you definitely can. And you can increase AI safety through your work, through advocacy, joining others, coming to conferences like this, donating to ASAT organizations. It's understandable that there may be some feelings of futility, especially with this big, large remaining problem with billions, if not trillions of dollars incentivizing people to go in a certain direction. But that can be counterproductive. And while it can be difficult to sort of keep that in mind, the idea that you can't do everything, so therefore you won't do anything, just doesn't make sense. But we often have to remind ourselves of this. There's a feeling, you can feel overwhelmed, but that feeling is not necessarily a reliable guide to what you should do. It's hard to rationalize yourself into hope, I think. But I do think you can make effort and progress on rationalizing yourself away from hopelessness. And I think we have good reasons for hope. Because, again, the problem could be solvable. We just have to try harder. And if there's a world where the problem was solvable and we didn't try, well, we're a lot less likely to find the solution to the problem. And also, having some notion of positivity and optimism, I think this is more likely to achieve outcomes in general. There are good reasons for hope here. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Darren. We're going to be beginning the Q&A session now. Again, we invite you to ask your questions in the swap card, and we'll be going through the questions based on how they're ranked within the app. And if your question doesn't get answered, we invite you to join Darren at his office hours in Hyde Park right after this session. So, starting off, you are the author of Uncontrollable, The Threat of Artificial Superintelligence and the Race to Save the World.
Sure.
Why did you write this book?
I wrote the book because I thought we needed a book for everyone. I was in the community and following along for 10, 20 years, and there were very capable people writing books, doing research, being engaged with the topic, and I was following a lot of their work. And I didn't really see an overt role. I mean, I would talk about it with friends, and I would try to raise awareness on my own local community stuff. But for a larger contribution, it really was around May 2022, when a couple models came out and Metaculus dropped their projection of when AGI might arrive by about 10 years over a 2-week period. I had a oh wow moment. Things were happening even faster than what people thought, even though they thought things were going to happen quickly. And I thought, well, maybe I can write this book. And so I had had lots of experience in different domains trying to take a complicated subject and make it more accessible. And I thought I would just give it a shot. So in this sense, I saw a gap or a perceived gap in what I thought was something useful, and I tried to fill it.
Thank you. And who would you say you wrote the book for? What audience?
It's intended for people who are concerned but have little background. So it really is for everyone. People in this room who are concerned about the issue but haven't been following along. It could be people in different walks of life, different ages. It really is anyone who's thinking, what the heck is going on with AI? And why are people so concerned? Or maybe why should I be concerned? There's no technical background required, and it really tries to make the subject both engaging as well as accessible.
Thank you. How was the process of getting published?
Well, both easy and difficult. I mean, you can easily self-publish something online, but it doesn't make it a good product. So the writing process was unpleasant. I'll acknowledge that. A lot of people say writing is unpleasant, and I also have that experience. So for people in the audience, sometimes you do have to push through negative-like experiences to achieve a goal, but it's very important to have a sense of your own, I guess, limits and whether you are going to do damage to yourself or not. Like in this practical sense, self-care, that sort of balancing act, how much you can push is really important to be aware of, lest you inadvertently burn out. And because if you don't have a sense of your limits, you may not know when you're very close to crossing them. So all that to say is it was a big push, and I was unhappy for chunks of it, but I thought it was worth the overall goal, and I just thought that's what needed to be done.
I would say so too. Would you say it was a full-time commitment, or is this something that an expert can work on part-time?
Well, I guess I did it both full-time and part-time. There's a context here where the writing itself is one thing, but reading about the issues, thinking about how to explain things over a 10 or 20 year period before that takes a lot of time. And without that context and background, I probably could not have done it in the relatively short time I did.
See, thank you. we have a question in the audience. When talking about verification, how do we ensure that the verifiers of a billion or trillion dollar industry are not corrupted, as we've seen with nearly every industry?
That's a great question. We need more and more people working on this precise question, as well as many others. And so, like almost any problem in the world, it's complicated, it's nuanced, we can see the incentives, and it usually relates to advocacy in one domain or another, increase the transparency, increasing attention on an issue to make it more and more likely that such a thing is not occurring. It is, there's a whole series of very difficult problems associated with this particular problem, and that's one of them. But I think it is possible to address, if not surmount. Like everything else, attention, time, transparency. And by that I mean shining a light on this concern, trying to raise this as a concern to people in industry or other parts of the world so that we can have such systems.
Thank you. For anyone trying to communicate to the public big risks like AI that are initially accessible, do you have any advice?
Well, first is, I guess, get a sense of what you're really trying to say. Like, it's great that people are engaged or care, but it doesn't necessarily mean what they're going to try to communicate will be effective or useful. Now, that could happen because you're doing a lot of sort of internal homework, but more likely in this world, as long as your messaging is not too controversial, you can try different things and see what sticks. That is a different approach, where you're starting a Substack, you're starting a blog, you're doing stuff on TikTok, and you're just seeing what's going to resonate and attract more attention, which will then get the feedback of validating which message would seem to resonate with people. I'm not sure the particular landscape at this exact moment, but I think certain platforms like TikTok are probably, relatively speaking, neglected. We have lots of blogs, there are academic papers, there are books, but I think there could be different avenues to explore in social media of shorter form content that could be effective.
Thank you. Are there reliable models today that are able to accurately predict the growth, impact, and risks of AI, considering that it has been exponential and unpredictable? If so, where can we find more information about them?
I don't think there are, so I don't know where you might look. I think people are working on it. I mean, if it was truly reliable, it would be predicting the future. It would be like a crystal ball, which would be remarkable and amazing, and that's also why it's unlikely to exist. So I think it makes sense for people to try to do this as much as possible because we need that understanding. We can only go with the best of what we have, right? And in that sense, we're going to try to model different systems, what their capabilities are, and what they might do if they had those capabilities. But when you talk to people in the leading labs, they're often surprised by something their model could do. Like, oh, we didn't know what to do that. Oh, we didn't think it was going to do that. Or, oh, we only trained it on English and now it speaks other languages. So it's not really reassuring when you have someone say, well, you have a new model, you're putting, say, a certain number of microchips in, or it has a certain number of computational processing power, flocks. So what will it be able to do? The answer is, well, we'll have to figure it out. And that figuring it out is often a multi-month / years process. And sometimes it's only revealed when the public is engaging with it. So it is very difficult to model such a thing because you start to get into modeling the nature of the world, and that itself is very limited.
Has thinking about possible impending AGI changed the actions you take in your day-to-day life, or changed your behaviors or long-term planning?
I mean, aside from writing the whole book, which, well, this is the main thing, I was concerned enough. In short, I was concerned enough that I spent a lot of time writing this book, because I think more people should be aware so they can make an informed decision for themselves about what they think the risks are and what we should be about. So it really was a dramatic life shift, which I wasn't quite planning on, but I thought it was important enough. Separately, these concerns, the uncertainty, has validated or reaffirmed a belief I already had, which is that time is precious, life is fleeting, it always is. You never know how things are going to go. So try to do things you enjoy before you can't, for one reason or another. I think the pandemic really showed people a lot of how much basic life is to integrate it, or travel, or whatever it may be. So similarly, do things before you can't, but also try to raise awareness to make the world safer.
Thank you. Your career trajectory is very interesting. How did you go from psychology and public administration to AI safety?
Lots of I mean, that's mainly it, to be, I'm not playful there, but I've always been a fan of science and trying to understand how the world works from a scientific perspective, that methodology, and the psychology, a bit of neuroscience, a lot of cognitive science, does provide some foundation for understanding neural networks. or how complex systems might work in general. And then I also have a degree in public policy administration, which then gives a lens for when you're trying to address problems, how might that work in sort of a real world set? And then separately, just honestly, taking in lots and lots of material, talking to experts, reading a lot, and thinking things through. Hopefully in some sort of dialogue sometimes, because if you're just doing it on your own, we could end up in the wrong spots. But if you spend years and years reading a book a week, things start to add up and we get the models of the world, which are likely to be more accurate. And that allows for a better understanding of what might work and how to communicate sectorful. This is not a very technical book, which I don't think I could have written. So that's the other thing. If this was a technical book, I think I wrote it, I think it'd be bad, because that would not be my skill set. So it really was thinking that this particular book, which is trying to take these ideas which are accessible if you had enough time with them and making them even more accessible, was something I thought I'd do.
Thank you. You mentioned in your talk a safety moonshot. How do you feel about the feasibility of coordinating or enforcing a clause to give more time for the safety moonshot?
I think if you can wave a magic wand, it might work. But since we don't have magic wands, it seems like it's unlikely to work. And I say this because the incentives are very strong to keep building more and more powerful systems. And representatives from various countries have said as such. So while I think let's put this, we're a multiplayer game, as they say, and you need different parties pushing in different ways to try to achieve certain outcomes. So I think it is useful to have that role. I'm not sure how much it will succeed, but that doesn't mean people should stop.
Thank you. How do you get the public involved and invest in AI safety? And I'll give a pragmatic question. How do I talk to my parents about AGI? Do I compare it to nuclear warfare, or it's just think of the day that you first bought a computer? Think about your life.
These are great questions. I mean, you're like, well, if you had many parents, you would try different strategies and then take the best ones and then, yeah. So talk to your friends or parents and do a coordinated effort. Give them my book. The book is written for adults and older people as well. My mom read it and she liked it and her friends have read it. So it really was meant to be accessible for everyone. And without knowing your parents, it's hard to prescribe something. But one of those strategies, which are great suggestions, might go useful. I draw a parallel to nuclear weapons. I think it's very useful. It is imperfect and sometimes people don't like it, but people know that nuclear weapons are dangerous and they're very powerful and they could harm humanity. They are an exponential threat. So in that sense, there's a strong parallel. Now, of course, it's easier to develop these systems than nuclear weapons, as I mentioned, and many other ways in which they're discontinuous, we'll say, as analogies. I think it's useful to try multiple things. Most of the time, people do not change their mind in a real-time, single-shot conversation. That seems to be my method. And so with any dialogue you're having with anyone, especially family members, because you're probably seeing them more than once, you will be iteratively communicating these ideas. And so don't go all in right away. That would seem to make little sense. But if you can provide them with ideas or concepts to lay the foundation, not to trick them, but to try to describe reality in a way of this is a real risk, I think that's a more prudent way to go. And over months, maybe even years, you have someone say, oh, okay, I see there might be a problem. Now, once in a while, someone does have a burst of insight, and perhaps just showing them, depending on who they are, how ChatGPT works for what video generation can be done or music generation. Again, I think music might be useful, but depending on who the person is and the generation, like at some point, people had, recorded music, records, then tapes, CDs, and then it was streaming, MP3s, right? When the iPod came out, 1,000 songs in your pocket was remarkable. And a lot of people thought, well, surely that's it, right? We're not changing this again. Well, now it doesn't even need to be in your pocket, right? It can be streamed, and that's what a lot of Spotify did. It's somewhere on some server, somewhere else on Earth in the cloud, and then you can just access it through streaming. Surely that's it. Well, now we have music generation, where it'll soon be the case, I think, where you just whisper to the air what music you want, and it's created in real time. This is remarkable. This is amazing. And I think people just don't realize how far things have come. So I guess what I'm suggesting is a series of different types of approaches, some of which is the basic communication of, well, isn't intelligence really powerful? Without even talking about AI, which you'll see that I did, to lead the foundation, and then also showing some of the things that are currently capable of achievable, which might then provide insight or even concern.
Thank you. Certainly not to say that the risk isn't significant, but I'm curious if the massive popularity of evil AI narratives in movies and other fiction lead us to overweight or bias the risk of these outcomes in the AI space. That is over other existential risks. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's an interesting question. So society, in a way, has laid the groundwork for some of these ideas being more psychologically accessible in some way. There's a long history of fiction, definitely movies, and yet some people are resistant. So is it the case that we've been sort of too primed and we're now accepting them without enough scrutiny, or not? I think it's more likely the other way. Actually, I'll add a qualifier. I think like anything in life, there's a distributed mass of opinions, which is not easily categorized, to say in a simple graph, where some people are very concerned. They saw Terminator, recently or 3 decades ago, like, of course, there's a problem. What are you talking about? And other people, they're deep into the literature. They've been studying this for years and like, of course, there's a problem. And then there's all sorts of other people all over the place, which have different degrees of exposure, and they are more or less concerned for all sorts of reasons. I think the other side works too, that sometimes because it's been in fiction, science fiction, people think it is fictional. Well, that's just a movie. That's just a sci-fi story. That's not plausible. And I think that's an incorrect framing. It could be true, but we also know from many other advances, if you look at the people in tech, they often say, I watched some sci-fi show when I was very young, and that inspired me to do X, Y, Z. And so basically yesterday's science fiction becomes today's reality. And people don't realize we are living in a world of science fiction compared to, well, even just recently, right? Especially our ancestors. They would have no idea what we're doing here. Right? Flying around with our magic rectangles, streaming video across the surface of the earth. What is this? Are you a wizard? It's so unbelievable. It's hard to comprehend how conceptually overreach a lot of that reality would be. So I think it might undercut things in that way, that I think people should be more concerned than they are. Thus, of course.
Thank you. In your book, you talk about this concept of cognitive humility. What is it and why should we have it?
I guess. Well, it's just more being aware that you might not know everything. Like it's once it's set up, be like, yeah, of course. But then when we navigate through the world, we often don't have that at the forefront of our minds. We feel very confident in our thoughts and our feelings, and that leads us to think that they are accurately mapping for reality. When a more reliable or fair appraisal might be, well, this is my understanding of it, but how is the world see it? Is this how it should be seen, sort of thing? So I think it makes sense to understand your brain is systematically biased, to try to work to reduce those biases, and to do as many system checks as possible with friends who seem to trustworthy, being aware when you're having your own cognitive deficits. It's sort of like, again, once you ask people, like, have you ever forgotten anything? They're like, well, yes. Like, well, what about the stuff you don't remember forgetting? Uh-oh. How big is that, right? And so there's a whole host of things where you don't quite know what you may be missing out on. And at some point, also acknowledging that we're all limited. You're just only going to be able to see the world a certain way because you also exist in a certain time in history, and that is limited. So there's an unknown ocean of, we'll say, knowledge or understanding that we don't currently have, which should provide some humility.
I think that's all the time we have. Thank you so much, Darren.
I did.